Fragility under fire. One mistake ends Dubois versus Wardley. They've sparred, Wardley even picked him, and Dubois supposedly got the better of it. But sparring can lie. Dubois brings terrifying power and sharp moments, yet those weak defensive lapses still exist. Wardley isn't scared of punchers, he is a puncher. The real question isn't Daniel's chin, it's his heart under chaos. 2 prime heavyweights, 2 finishers, May the 9th, blink once and it's over. Fragility under fire. Why one mistake ends Dubois versus Fabio Wardley. So in this, I have learnt 3 new things about Fabio Wardley and Daniel Dubois. So I've learnt 3 new things. Number 1, they have sparred before. Number 2, Fabio Wardley actually picked to fight Daniel Dubois. So it wasn't mandatory. He actually picked Daniel Dubois. And finally, number 3, according to Fabio Wardley, Daniel Dubois got the better of the sparring. Let's unpack this, or let's unpack the final part of this. Sparring is different to boxing someone professionally. I'm going to give an example of this, or a reference point, using Floyd Mayweather. So if you fight Floyd Mayweather in the ring, as we all know, or as the boxing purists know, he is a defensive genius. He's similar to like a Pernell Whitaker, but in the orthodox position. He's very difficult to hit. However, if you went to Floyd Mayweather's gym and you sparred him, according to Andre Ward, Floyd's a different animal. He's not the defensive-minded. He becomes more aggressive. He takes risks. The point is, the identity of Floyd, the professional fighter, is different to Floyd, the person that's sparring. To give an analysis here, different context, different outcome. Different context, different outcome. So in the sparring context of Fabio Wardley and Daniel Dubois, Fabio Wardley was a novice in comparison to Daniel Dubois. Despite this, Daniel Dubois takes some confidence from those sparring sessions. But is it misplaced confidence? That's what's important. And did Daniel Dubois hurt Fabio Wardley in those spars, or did he just simply dominate those spars? So I guess the important thing is that sparring doesn't determine the outcome, but on a psychological level, it can give someone confidence, but it's a misplaced sense of confidence. So this creates the question, why would Fabio pick Daniel Dubois? Why would you pick such a dangerous opponent? So hypothetically speaking, if you watch the Hrgović fight versus Daniel Dubois, if I was Fabio Wardley, I would get so much confidence from that fight because Daniel Dubois took about 40 right hands from Filip Hrgović. So in this sense, stylistically, this could be a great fight for Fabio Wardley. But think of this. What is the worst fight stylistically for Fabio Wardley? What is the worst fight for him? Well, I would think that someone who's a defensive master, someone who does not get hit, that's a Fabio Wardley nightmare. To be specific, someone who can negate the jab, because Fabio Wardley likes to establish his jab, negate the backhand, and control the distance. That would give Fabio Wardley absolute massive problems. But what is the most ideal opponent for Fabio Wardley? Surely that would be someone who not only stays in punching range, but has a weak defense. I would argue that Daniel Dubois doesn't have a weak defense, but he has weak defensive moments. Let me reiterate that. Daniel Dubois does not have a weak defense, but he has weak defensive moments. There is a difference. Can you spot it? But let's not forget, and this is an important caveat, that Daniel Dubois can punch too. His power is terrifying. Shane McGuigan, former trainers, I'm assuming former opponents, can attest to this. Let me paint this picture clearly. Let me paint it clearly for you. Fabio Wardley is not the only puncher in this fight. Both Daniel Dubois and Fabio Wardley can punch. They can punch significantly hard. Think of this. If Mike Tyson fought George Foreman, you would not say one is a puncher and the other one isn't a puncher. You would say that they were both very hard, dynamic, powerful punchers. And in a similar way, both Dubois and Wardley are hard punchers. So when I think about this fight, I think of two boxers that come to fight. They're entertaining. They throw punches. They let their hands go. They give the crowd what they want. They both have great fights. So what's the problem? The problem is that they're really good at entertaining, but they're not the best at marketing. And marketing is important in boxing. When I think of great marketers from the boxing context, I think of a variety of boxers. Floyd Mayweather, Brian Garcia, Mike Tyson, Tyson Fury, Prince Nassim Hamed, and of course, Muhammad Ali. Now, Fabio Wardley seems like an intelligent person. He's very coherent and he articulates himself well, but he just doesn't seem to have the identity of a trash talker. That's just not his thing. Dubois, he seems to be introverted and he wants to fight. He doesn't look like he wants to talk. He just wants to fight. I get it. So that means we got to enter Don Charles. Who is Don Charles? Don Charles is the trainer that has been reinstated for Daniel Dubois. But it looks like not only does Don Charles need to train Daniel Dubois, it looks like he needs to talk for him as well. Additional to this, you have Sam Jones, who is also very good lyrically. The main point here is that in the press conferences, you're not getting Daniel Dubois arguing with Fabio Wardley. You're getting into teams arguing with each other. It's a very different angle. And the CV analogy, Sonia Jackson compared to Jennifer Lopez, this was articulated by Sam Jones, was absolutely diabolical work. Let's swiftly move on. And the Sam Jones debate, because he's been debating with Fabio Wardley's manager, that brings an interesting lyrical dimension, and that brings it brings like another interesting element to the marketing, similar to when you had Eubank fighting Ben. You had Eubank arguing with Ben, but then you had Eubank also arguing with Eddie Hearn. And I'm talking about Chris Eubank Jr., Conor Ben, as opposed to Eubank Sr. and Nigel Ben. But Don Charles, he's interjecting himself, and he sounded quite angry. One of his things was that who has Fabio faced? Talk is cheap and don't blink. And Daniel Dubois is the specialist at taking people's zeros. But the interesting dynamic here is that clearly this has the ingredients of being a great fight, but the talking is going to be done by the teams as opposed to the boxers. And, when it comes to boxing, boxing is multifarious. There's various things. Boxing is not just physical. It's also technical. It's also mental. It's also psychological. And unfortunately, there seems to be this question. And there seems to be this question about Daniel Dubois' heart. Not questioning his punch resistance, not questioning his chin, not necessarily questioning his power and speed, but questioning his heart. No one is questioning Fabio Ward's heart, as we've seen it time and time again. He was very brave in the Joseph Parker fight as he took a lot of punches and came back to win. But I think when it comes to Daniel Dubois, people quickly set that table that Daniel Dubois has no heart. Like it's either or, it's just black and white. But I think to say Daniel Dubois has no heart, it may be unfair. Because don't you have to have heart to get in the ring? Don't you have to have heart to beat Gerald Miller, who was unbeaten at the time and was a pressure fighter? Don't you have to have heart to beat Filip Hrgović? Don't you have to have heart to beat Anthony Joshua? And don't you have to have heart to take on Fabio Wardley after coming off what could be considered a devastating loss? So the premise that Daniel Dubois doesn't have heart is an unfair premise, But maybe the better question is, does Fabio Wardley have more heart than Daniel Dubois? I think the reality here is very positive. Two heavyweights in their primes, two big punchers. They both can deliver knockouts at any time. The Frazier knockout by Fabio Wardley was not only viral, it was absolutely terrifying and scary. And we have good skill levels by both camps and good competent camps as well. In effect, when you look at this fight, you think, this has all the ingredients. This has all the ingredients to be a great fight on May the 9th. So before we go into the next segment, because we're going to transition into another video, I just want to say the following thing. So I'm trying to build a digital boxing community. So that means part of that is being interested in your comments, interested in your questions, and interested in your observations. Now, if you want to support the video, all you have to do is like and subscribe. So with that being said, let's transition into the next part. This is a film study on the Chris Eubank Jr. Conor Benn rematch. In this fight, Conor Benn showed some good boxing IQ. So we will look at the subtle boxing strategies and hopefully aid understanding. Now, Conor Benn is part of the boxing algorithm, but he also has some underestimated boxing skills. Let's talk about it. You can see the stance difference with Conor Benn's weight more firmly on his back foot. Chris Eubank Jr. steps to the right, fires a jab. Conor steps back and uses the measuring left to blur his vision. Now the step back takes away the distance and the measuring jab gives even more defensive insurance. Conor Benn does a big foot feint and this draws a defensive reaction from Chris as he is stepping to his right. Now Conor does a subtle jab feint which draws a reaction from Chris Eubank Jr.'s glove. Conor dips to the left, changing levels and gets under Chris Eubank Jr.'s jab. Chris Eubank Jr. is now circling to his left with small subtle steps, but is close to the ropes. Conor feints with the jab and throws a big right to the body, which lands. Conor's left hand feint to the head sets up the body shot, and Chris Eubank Jr. steps to the left creates a great angle for the right hand. Also, being on the ropes means that Chris Eubank Jr. can't use the step back defensive system. This is controlled aggression. Chris Eubank Jr. throws a double jab low to the head. Conor Benn dips to his right and steps back, avoiding the punches. Conor gets back in range and throws a jab to the head. It misses and Chris Eubank Jr. transitions his hands to a high defense. Eubank steps to his left, creating a new angle, while Conor capitalizes on the angle and lands a jab to the head. At this point, Conor is putting on front foot pressure. Conor throws a hard jab, followed by a hard straight right. Conor throws the straight right with his head going past his front foot. This commitment to the right hand is called punching through the target. Now there is a risk here. You increase the chances to hurt your opponent with this, but there is a greater opportunity for your opponent to counter. After throwing the right, Conor pushes out his left to spoil any counter opportunities. Conor does a slight right hand feint and attempts a left feint to the head and a right hook to the body. They end up in a clinch, and this part is important. Conor Benn wraps up the hands of Chris Eubank Jr. and pushes Eubank back to the ropes. This indicates strength and a dominant position. Now the feints are creating the attacks, and Conor Benn is being physically dominant in the clinch. Conor measures with the left. He then does a feint with both hands. This feint creates a defensive reaction from Chris Eubank Jr. Chris Eubank Jr. steps forward and they both end up in a clinch. Conor Benn marches Chris back to the ropes, showing strength. He then puts his head on Chris Eubank Jr.'s chest and tilts his head slightly to the right. This creates an angle for the right hand to the head. Conor again puts his head deep into the left side of Chris Eubank Jr.'s chest. Eubank now has his weight on his back foot. This creates an angle for the right uppercut from Conor Benn. Conor throws this from a low level, and Chris Eubank Jr. can't see it. Now Chris Eubank Jr. is holding the left arm of Conor, which nullifies his left, but Conor is creating angles for the backhand in the clinch. Again, this is good innovation from Conor Benn. Also, Conor Benn appears stronger and more dominant. So when we talk about Conor Benn, and when we talk about, the Conor Benn Eubank fights, I think it's important to preface this with the following statement, that in boxing there are levels. In boxing there are levels. There's British level, European level, championship level, etc. And many people speculate, often negatively, maybe unfairly, what level Conor Benn is on. But what may be absolute, or what may be more absolute, if such thing could exist, is that Conor Benn, through the Eubank fights, through those two fights, he has improved. From the Eubank Jr. fights, he has shown evolution. Boxing can go in a variety of ways when it comes to boxers. They can progress, they can go backwards, or they could stay the same. Other times they can reach a peak. Think of Evander Holyfield versus Mike Tyson. Fantastic performance. Or Pacquiao versus Cotto. Or Roy Jones versus James Toney. These are times when fighters have reached like a magical peak. Now, the Eubank Jr. fight has had criticisms. And let's be honest. Let's be really honest. Perhaps many of those criticisms are justified. However, think of this. You can criticize the performance and still acknowledge the improvements. Let me repeat. You can criticize the performance and still acknowledge the improvements. And then the next question, or the obvious question, would be, well, what are the improvements? In a simple sense, well, I think I made my case what the improvements were in the beginning segment of this video. But in simple terms, the improvements were the following: the feints, the jab, the step back, the head movement, and more intelligent body work. Conor Benn, in a sense, has improved his boxing intelligence. He has improved his boxing intelligence. And yes, he is an emotional fighter, and often when we think of emotions, we don't think of intelligence. But emotions need to be challenged through logical attack strategies if they're going to be effective. And in the second fight, there was what we call a method to the madness. In this sense, or for this camp, or for that second fight, Conor was, in a sense, committed to the mastery of boxing, and hopefully that continues. And also in the Eubank fights, there were significant mental tests, no pun intended, whether it was the failed test, the first fight, the build-up, the cancellations, etc. And think of this, our psychological makeup is often complementary to our pugilistic skills, and Conor Benn has shown a psychological toughness. Now, boxing purists love the mastery of boxing. They love it. I guess you could ask the question, what is a boxing purist? But I think that's a bit of a deflection. But people that are passionate about boxing, they love the mastery of boxing, generally speaking. And from that perspective, I think the second fight is a reference that Conor Benn is invested. He's invested in that currency. If the skill or mastery of boxing is a currency, then Conor Benn has made an investment. But that, of course, doesn't mean that there's genuine criticism, because criticism can come from a hateful place or it can come from a genuine place. But let's have the cognitive ability to separate the politics, the personality, and the boxing, because they are separate things. Also, there's another context here, and that's from a marketing perspective. Conor Benn is a part of the boxing algorithm. He's part of the British boxing algorithm, the boxing algorithm, and now it looks like he's going to be a part of the American boxing algorithm. For example, his first fight with Chris Eubank, one of the videos has 6.1 million views, very impressive. And I saw another marketing video of the first fight, which had 1.8 million views. Metaphorically speaking, people are criticizing. They're criticizing the chapters. But even though they criticize the chapters, they are reading the book and they're paying for the book, figuratively speaking. People are interested. People might hate. They might have some real unfavorable things to say, but they're invested. And the marketing machine of Conor Benn will probably only get bigger. I guess, in a nutshell, what I'm saying is that Conor Benn is trying to master the craft of boxing. And I think it's important that we acknowledge that. It's important that we acknowledge that evolution. It's important that we acknowledge that currently he is a sincere student of the boxing game. Now that's the end of the video. Now I'm trying to build a digital boxing community. That means I'm interested in your questions, your comments, and your observations. Now, if you want to support the channel, all you have to do is simply like and subscribe. And if you want more content, if you want to watch more content, then click here or click here. As always, thanks for your time. It is much, much appreciated. Peace.